I thought I should be part of this. Uh, I should be part of this discussion. Uh, Before I go into the panel, I would like to, talk about a little bit on this topic to set the tone. And based on that, we'll have our discussion going on by the panelists who are here.
Call you back.
One thing is very sure that India is making a collective effort and very strong effort to, reduce these gender gaps in gender gaps in employability. There are a lot of effort which is being taken care by government of India, and a lot of efforts has been taken by private initiatives and other things. There's a lot of effort which is coming in this. Although, based on the World Economic Forum Global Genders Report 2021, it does not talk so positive about their status. So, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was talking about the World Economic Forum Global Gender Report 2021, which does not talk so much good about the status of India, but but we know that there are a lot of efforts which is being done, and we will be doing great, and that's why I'm here to listen to the panelists. There are a few dichotomy which I wanted to raise it here at this moment. I was just reading few of an article and which talks about. I was seeing an article where it has referred to a data given by CMIE, and which says that the women and during the first lockdown, women lost around 13.9% jobs. Men also lost jobs in that lockdown, but in November around 2020, the entire most of the men got back their job, but still around 49% women didn't get back this job. So this is a negative part of it. I'm just putting it here. Another story which I read, which is very nicely written and which depends on the India Skills Report 2021, and which says that the women employability in India has gone up around 46.8%. And it has gone up for one reason, which is basically the digital economy. There are a lot of recruitments which has happened in this sector, and which has really enhanced the employability of women, and that has reduced to some extent the gender inequality. Another sector which has shown a lot of employability in this is basically the BFSI industry, from where I belong. So this dichotomy is there, that one part is saying there's a loss of job, and people, women they have not got back their job, and other segment, which is from organized sector, is saying that a lot of employability has gone up. So there's a dichotomy in Indian economy about this, between urban and rural employability, between organized sector and unorganized sector, between social factors and political economic factors, and so on and so forth. And to discuss all this points, I think there is a tremendously good panel which is present today, and they will be talking about this, not me. And just to introduce them, let me take 2 minutes of yours to introduce these three eminent panelists. Let me start with Professor Subodh Mathur, who may not require so much introduction because people know him very well. But just for some people who don't know him, Professor Subodh Mathur is an economist, PhD MIT. He has a wide-ranging international US policy and operational experience. He has worked in several countries in Asia and Africa as a consultant for the World Bank. He has also worked as an economist for a variety of US agencies. This includes DC Public Service Commission, the DC Department of Energy and Environment, Maryland Energy Investigations, and US Postal Service. He has a proven teaching record. He is an occasional adjunct professor of economics at the American University, Washington, D.C. He teaches mainly graduate courses. And sir, your latest book on India's path prosperity to 2022-2047, a workable agenda for next 15, is getting quite a bit of good review. Another, so that's our first panelist. We will be speaking after this, but let me introduce the other two panelists, eminent panelists also in this. And let me introduce Ms. Mitu Chawla, an internationally certified coach and founder of Thinker Minds, a company that imparts mindset and success training and mentors individuals, especially youth, to design their best life possible. Our main key speaker for today is Mitali Nikor, an experienced economist and public policy specialist with a demonstrated history of advising multilateral organizations like ADB, World Bank, UN, and private sector consulting firm PwC and Genesis Analytics. Skilled in industry analysis, market assessment, value chain assessment, logistic and transport sector, and urban development. Strong academic record with MSc in economics from London School of Economics and Political Science, and founder of research group Nikor Associates. So these are the three eminent panelists who will be speaking today. And from this, you can understand that tribe believes in gender equality or more towards feminism. So we have two lady speakers and one gent speaker. So with that, I hand it over to Professor Sudhir Mathur to take it forward. Thank you so much.
Professor Chakrabarty, Mr. Bajaj, and all the honored people here, all interested people here. Let me say I'm not an expert on gender issues at all, but I'm an economist. And economists are interested in many things. As Professor Becker taught us in the 1950s, and he got a Nobel Prize for this, that decisions within the family are within the realm of economics. It's not just sociology and customs and all these other things. He was the first one who said, listen, economists, wake up. This is not a social business. Don't leave it to sociologists. Economists have a role in it. And in the end, people all scoffed, people all laughed, but in the end, he got a Nobel Prize for it. And since then, economists have been interested in these issues. Last year, I wrote a book, which was not about India, which was not about women. It was on what is called as core economics. And within it, I had a chart, which I will just show you if I can do a shared screen properly. Let me get to it and see if I can. Anyway, let me first find, okay, here it is. All right, here. So, hang on, where's my screen? I can't see. Hang on, let me do my screen and show it to you. Well, just a second, please. I'm really having a hard time with it for a moment. Okay, here. Just a second. Okay, here. We have the chart up, and let me get back to Zoom and share the screen. Okay, can you see that now? Yes, I think so. All right. So here is a chart which is from my book on core economics. It is the labor force participation rate in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And what it is showing you is that according to the data that we have since 2003, India's women's participation in the labor force has declined. But the reason I also included Pakistan and Bangladesh is because people will say, well, it's a social issue. I say, well, if it's a social issue, Pakistan and Bangladesh are not so different from us in culture. So how come ours declined and theirs did not? Now, I don't have any answers for this, but I will talk about Bangladesh, and let's talk about it now. Then I can move on to some other topics. I suspect that the Indian data are not quite accurate, but let's anyway talk about Bangladesh, why it has stayed high. Because of economic policies. Bangladesh is heavily into exports, and what they are exporting is ready-made garments. And these ready-made garments are made in Dhaka, and I guess also in Chittagong. They're made in large factories, some of which are unsafe. And they are really employing only young women straight from the villages or small cities who are willing to come to Dhaka. And, they aren't married, they don't have family, so you don't have all those issues. So you are really able to get those women to come and work in this for fairly low wages, but better than what they can earn in their villages. And actually, many of them are supporting their families back in the village. So they are able to come to Dhaka, they are able to work this. It's not an easy job, it's a tough job, but they are better off than they were in the village, partly because they are escaping the patriarchy of the village. So they're quite happy to come to Dhaka, which is much more free, and to have some money, which gives them empowerment. And so you see the labor force participation rate has not declined. As to what's happening in Pakistan, I don't know. So I'm not going to say anything about that. But this was not written in response to any issues related to women. It is just a chapter in the core economics, right? So every economist should understand what the labor force is made up of. And so here I had a chart, which is not at all about in an applied book. Okay, so let me stop sharing the screen now and talk more generally. So I'm also involved with a group called FEA. My friend Amit Shah, who's also here, is also involved in it. And we can talk, he can also say a couple of words about it. And we are really doing Zoom calls with the young, motivated, hardworking Indians, 16 to 28, 25 years old, who could not afford a good education, but now want to make up, right? So that's what they are. And we just have 5 Zoom calls with them. And we are just trying to build their self-confidence. But inevitably, we come across the problem of patriarchy. The women are usually saying, sir, you're telling me to do this and do that, but I can't listen to you. I have to listen to somebody else. And how can I make my own decisions? Because I don't have that freedom. So you can tell me that I can do this and I can do that, but I cannot. And the responses are somewhat surprising also. The first time I got a hint about this was I asked them as homework to listen to some music and give their comments. And one of the homework was to listen to M.S. Subbulakshmi singing in Sanskrit in the UN General Assembly in 1966, okay? So of course, none of us really know Sanskrit that well, but anyhow, 2 of the women there said, sir, we can't believe that she could actually achieve so much at that age. They were not interested in the fact that she was singing in Sanskrit, but they were just awed by the fact that she was speaking, she was allowed to get so far ahead and get a Bharat Ratna for it. Right? They said, how could she do it in the 1930s? Because we can't even do it anything now. So this is an issue that we grapple with in the FEA sessions. And both Amit and I actually invite women to be part of our sessions, guests, because we can't communicate to these women. We look like the patriarchs they're trying to escape. I look like their grandfather. How can I convince them of anything? Because I'm the patriarchy in their minds that they are being controlled by, right? So I'm 70 years old. I don't look like anybody sympathetic. If you can see Amit's face, he also looks like the patriarchy. So we both have, in the end, decided that we got to have women and we got to show these younger women, the accomplished Indian women. We can't speak for them because we just don't have that cultural authority or credibility. So we both have women in our group who can at least talk to them, but even they are frustrated because they say, you know, we can't succeed because we are not authoritative. We don't have the ability. They hear us, but then they say we can't do it, right? Because we have other forces to contend with. Now, all of this came to my mind when I wrote a recent book of mine, which is on how can India become prosperous by 2047. And in it is a chapter on how to have a productive, flexible workforce. Now, you can't have a productive, flexible workforce if the women aren't part of it. So I'm just looking at it from a purely economist perspective and not social justice, equality, or anything. Saying how the hell can we become prosperous if we keep our women from working, right? They're talented, they're bright, they go to, you read the stories that they are the toppers in the secondary schools. You know, I read the newspaper accounts and I find the women often top in secondary schools. You know, you look at the list, and I do. So you see that they are there, right? And then they're gone from the workforce. They're gone. So something happens to them along the way that they get into the workforce and then they're gone, right? They're toppers and then they are gone. So it's a struggle, and it's a struggle which we cannot solve overnight. Okay? We are not going to be able to change this today or tomorrow, because apart from the economics, there are also social factors, and I won't go into the social factors, but we can change the economics. The economics does matter. That's the message from me, that the economics does matter. No matter what the social factors, the economics does matter. And it may not just matter today or tomorrow, but it matters over time, right? And Mr. Bajaj just sent me a story from the US, which says that due to the pandemic, the mothers have withdrawn from the labor force in the US quite a bit. The net result of that is that the male wage rate has gone up. Right? So it matters what women do. It matters in the real world because there are fewer workers available. So they're scrounging around and they have to pay men more. Right? So anyway, what I'm saying is that the economics matters. And in Bangladesh, the rate is up, the participation rate is up. And as I said, it empowers the young women because they have found an occupation that not only they can do, but the family also grudgingly supports, because what the hell, these women are sending money back home, right? So it's very welcome. So economic policy does matter. And what matters is that we create the right working conditions. I had a discussion with a young woman who's also an FEA, and she said, sir, what you are proposing is what the moderates proposed in 1930, which is dominion status, not Purn Swaraj, full independence. We want full independence. I said, listen, I don't claim to speak for young women in India. I certainly don't know what their views are and opinions are. I live too far away. But in case some want a dominion status in which they have power sharing, then we should find occupations, we should create occupations, and we should make it happen so that they are able to earn some money under conditions that are workable within the family environment that they are in. Now, that's just an economist talking. I don't understand the sociology, and I don't claim to understand it. We have Mitali with us. I know she's an expert on these issues. And so I will leave those to her. And perhaps Mrs. Chawla is also an expert on those issues. So let me conclude by saying that as an economist, I think it's up to the policymakers to create the economic environment in which women can find a place to work which meets their needs. Now, I'm not about to say they should work and not look after the family. It's every woman's choice. My wife resigned from working when we were very young. She says, what the hell, it's your job, you bloody well earn. She also has an equal degree as I have. Actually, she's more educated than I am, but she's smarter than I am. And she said, listen, it's your job, go earn money. I'm not going to do it. I said, fine. Okay, so it's a choice between my wife and me. And we all make our own individual choices, but there are social factors at work. So let me stop there, Dr. Chakravarti, and I hand it back to you. And actually, I have another Zoom meeting I have to give a talk to college students in Delhi on my book. So I'm really sorry to stop here, but thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak. And so good to see so many faces. And that's it from me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mathur. Thank you. That was really nice. And you have said a very valid point. And we have some questions for you. Maybe we can share with you, or maybe in future you can respond in the tribe.
I will respond later because I do have to shift.
Yeah, sure. We understand that.
Thank you so much. Okay.
So,
bye-bye.
Thank you so much for being. So I think since you have raised various valid points, I think we'll take this discussion further And I'll request Mrs. Chawla to share her view. And then finally, we'll go to Ms. Mithali Nikor for her main session. Mrs. Chawla. You have to unmute yourself, Mrs. Chawla. You have to unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chakravarti. It's an honor to share this platform today with Professor Mathur, Ms. Nikor, Dr. Chakravarti, and Mr. Bajaj. I'm really looking forward to sharing my insight on basically from the perspective more of inclusion and social justice. It was a pleasure listening to Professor Mathur today, giving the perspective from economic perspective on this issue. So before I start my talk, we have actually a poll question that we would like to share, and we want the audience to poll, and we'll keep this conversation going today on this topic of gender gap in employment in India. So if the team could just put out the poll question for everyone to vote. I think it could be on the chat box. If people would just look at the chat box, maybe the poll question. Right. So it's there on the screen right now. Thank you for putting in your options here. And the correct answer is actually 49%. So the current global labor force participation rate for men is 75%. And this is from the source of International Labour Organization 2018. I am sure that this has been impacted negatively after the pandemic. So we can remove the screen now. We'll come back to you with another poll question in some time. I'm keen to share my perspective on gender gap in employment today, both as a working woman and someone who took a sabbatical 2 decades back as a new mother. As a senior professional in the biotech industry, I quit my successful job to take care of our newborn son due to lack of professional childcare options. I never went back to that profession, which I had been educated in and worked hard for. I had to re-educate and re-skill myself over the years to be successful in another profession as a coach and as an entrepreneur. So at Thinker Minds, that's the company I founded, which imparts mindset training. Gender equality, we discuss a lot with students because we teach sustainable development goals in our social leadership programs. So I would like to share, let me just screen share, if you could just give me a moment. Just a sec, I'm so sorry. There's some glitch, I think. Right. So gender gap in employment. Around the world, finding a job is much tougher for women than it is for men. Women who want to work have a harder time finding a job. When women are employed, they tend to work in low quality jobs and vulnerable conditions. So what exactly are vulnerable employment? What does a vulnerable employment look like? Women are more likely to work fewer hours or work part-time and work in low quality jobs compared to men, but usually not by choice. On an average, women spend nearly 3 times more hours on unpaid household and care work than men. This invisible labor often eats into the time they could spend doing paid work. Nearly 15% of employed women, compared with 5.5% of employed men, are contributing in a business owned or operated by a family member. And such workers are likely to be poorly paid, if at all, and have no employment contract or little access to social protection. Nearly 60% of women do not have a statutory right to maternity leave, and almost 60% are not legally entitled to paid maternity leave. This lack of coverage has a major impact on women's ability to hold down steady jobs and can stop them from returning to work after childbirth. Women often do not have access to social protection. And when they do, their entitlements are lower due to low pay, shorter contribution periods, and higher incidences of informal work. So we can see the social challenges that women face, and it's not a surprise then that the employment gap, the gender gap that we see. So there was a survey which I found really interesting by International Labour Organization and Gallup, who got together, teamed up to ask women across the globe, and they asked men as well, if they prefer to work in paid jobs or take care of their families or do both. And for all over the data all over the world, it was staggering 70% of women, regardless of their employment status, that prefer to work in paid jobs. And 66% of men would prefer women in paid jobs. But here is the statistics from India on your screen. And if you can see, the women were around 52% who preferred paid jobs compared to 65% men who would prefer women in paid jobs. So this was a little intriguing, and I would really like if Mitali could, later on throw some light on this, because this just set me thinking that what is holding Indian women back? As Professor Mathur was saying that, we have such educated, I think in the STEM subjects, the science related subjects, all over the world, India has the largest percentage of women being educated in STEM subjects. But negligible amount of them are in the workforce related to STEM. And I am one of them. As I was saying, I'm a biotechnologist by education, but not in that profession. So let's move on to the next. So what are the persistent challenges? These are the broad ones that I wanted to, from the social justice perspective, that I wanted to focus on. And I would just like to highlight some of them later on. But, the marital status, having children, a work-life balance, access to safe and affordable transportation, affordable and decent childcare, families who don't approve patriarchal society, digital access, education, safety. These are some very pertinent and very, very important concerns. Even when I coach young women, working women, and we have these conversations, I can see that some of these aspect factors are such a huge deterrent to women choosing the jobs that they feel they are entitled to or they are well qualified for. For the sake of this presentation today, I'm just going to club some of these factors together. So one of the groups that we could club this together is gender roles and work-life balance. So, this is one of the topmost factors that women don't actively seek employment. In countries at all levels of economic development, a woman's personal preference is the key factor in determining whether they want to go out and seek paid jobs. However, this preference is heavily influenced by socioeconomic constraints. One way to pressure to conform to gender role manifests itself is through marital status. This can often arise from the economic stability of a partner's income that can reinforce the male breadwinner bias. A patriarchal society consists of a male-dominant power structure, and it is the family that often sets the rules and reinforces cultural and social expectations on women. Therefore, we cannot rule out the familial influence in shaping these choices or decisions of women. Again, coming to childcare, household chores like cooking, cleaning, that's necessary for a household's welfare, and therefore also for the well-being of the society as a whole. But women still shoulder the brunt of this often invisible and undervalued workload. Lack of affordable and safe care facilities for children or other family members like elderly parents or parents-in-law is another significant contributing factor. Work-family balance is one of the toughest challenges for working women worldwide. These women are less likely to be able to put in longer hours, more likely to take leave for the provision of care and sick leave for family reasons, and to take career breaks to care for small children. We all know, women in our families who have done that. And as women, we ourselves has done that. And Professor Mathur also mentioned that about his wife. So yes, that is one of the social constraints that we really need to focus on. The next I thought is very important is transport and safety. So these are two, again, different factors which I have clubbed together. Feeling safe is an issue for women worldwide. Physical security is an important consideration for women's access to and transportation to work, particularly for shift work and night work. Yet it is too often lacking, even in the world's most highly developed regions. Time and again, we have witnessed horrific assaults on women during commute to work. Safety in general remains a key concern in India, and the perception of danger reinforces the social norms that restrict women's mobility. Sexual harassment, which disproportionately affects women at work, is a serious form of discrimination that involves fundamental power dynamics. It can lower the quality of working life, jeopardize well-being, and have serious cost implications for the workplace. So these, I thought, were some of the issues that were at the forefront as a society that we need to deal with, and maybe find a solution, as major stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders here? I think everyone, because it's about the gender gap is not only a social thing, it's also about the economics. And, significant steps need to be taken by all stakeholders, like the society, the family, governments, policymakers, employers, and some kind of support system needs to emerge for Indian women to provide them with equal opportunities and growth. Thank you so much. I would like to end my talk here, and I would be happy to answer any questions later on. And I would pass the forum now to Ms. Mithali Nikor. And yes, Mithali, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Meetu. How are you? It's good to see you again here.
Good to see you.
And I wish, Dr. Mathur could have stayed with us for longer, because he said such interesting, points, and of course showed us some very interesting data. So,
Right.
Very, very happy to talk to everybody, and a big hi to a lot of my team that has joined here today from Nikor Associates. So, hi everyone. And, I know you've been listening to a lot of views, a lot of points, and I absolutely love that Menti, sort of thing that you did, Meetu. It was great, like just to get everyone's, attention. So I think it would be really good if, while I'm speaking, and I'll of course be sharing my screen and I'll have a presentation, but please keep the questions coming, everybody, keep the questions coming, keep the thoughts going, because I'm going to just present some data points to you, which I hope will get you thinking, but will also try to answer some of the questions that, Dr. Subodh raised or Dr. Chawla raised right now about, what is it that we are facing here? So, let's dive into it. And please keep your questions coming, it's very important if you do that. So I hope you can see my screen. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I know Dr. Mathur, showed us the data, but before we actually get to this slide, I just want to show you actually a different slide, which is this one. Sorry if you can see. Yeah, this one. I love this slide. I made it, so obviously I love it, but I love it much more because it shows us the picture for India so clearly. And it starts off somewhere in 1987, but if we actually backdate the data even before that, at Nikor Associates, we have a proprietary database where we've done this analysis. And, we found that in the last 5 decades, and let this enormity of this number please sink into everybody, that since independence, since 5 to 7 decades, women's labor force participation rate has remained about 40 percentage points lower than men in our country. And the worst part is that in 2017-18, it was the year in which India was actually topping the global charts on GDP growth. It was called the world's fastest growing emerging economy. That was the year in which the female labor force participation rate fell to its lowest point ever since independence. So, we've had a lot of discussion, why, what is the data, blah, blah. Data doesn't lie. In this country, women are not getting the same opportunities as men, and we can see it in the data. And this has been a systematic, patriarchal, capitalist discrimination against women of all classes, education, wage levels, everything. So anybody who says and comes and says to me otherwise, I have uncles who will tell me at dinner parties, you have those conversations, but beta, aajkal to there are so many working women. तो अंकल थोड़ी तो होंगी ना, लेकिन आप proportion देखिए. Don't look at the absolute numbers around you of women who are working. I always tell people, look at the proportion of those who could be working but are not working. So I think the first takeaway for me when I have, looked at the data as an economist, and, of course, Dr. Mathur also is a very, very respected and reputable economist. However, he's not a woman. And unfortunately, you need to be a woman to be able to understand some of these issues. Like in his case, in his marriage, he shared with us that, yes, his wife chose to take a back seat. But did she really choose it? Is the question that I want to raise in front of everyone today. Or was it socialization? So now let's get into why we think, and my sort of analysis based on data on why we think this female labor force participation rate is so low. First of all, when we look further at the data and we just slice it by urban and rural, we can see that the exodus and the fall in female labor force participation rate actually began, especially around 2004-5. And then 17-18, it started rising slowly. So between 2004-5 to 2017-18, there was a massive exodus of rural women from the labor force. Now, of course, there is some amount of data irregularities, etc., which will explain some part of it, but that's not all of it. So why is it that we're seeing such a large proportion of rural women now moving out of the labor force becomes our first part of the puzzle. Second, on the urban side, we can see a stagnancy, right? We can see it clearly in the chart that in 2004-5, we have about 24-25% of women who are in the labor force. This is currently standing at about 23%. So there's not much change in the last 2 decades, actually, if you look at proportion, it's a slight reduction itself. And this is all pre-COVID data. So we can clearly see that from a long-term perspective, rural women are moving out of work and urban women are pretty much stable. Now, when we look at the wage gaps, we're starting to crack the puzzle now. The wage gaps is where something, starts to make sense to you. You can see from the calculations that we've done that when it comes to regular urban workers, the wage gap is the lowest there. Women are paid 79% of the male wage on average over the last 3 decades. Whereas when it comes to casual urban workers, that's where the discrimination hits you, because women are just paid 65% of the male wage. Overall, it's about 69%. So the main thing is that the first deterrent is already evident, right? Why should the woman take a back seat? Because she is likely to be paid less. So if between a couple, they have to make a decision on who is to work, economics, the man should. He will be paid more. Now, the other point that I want to really talk about, and these are 5 factors that I'm going to start talking about now as to explaining this, phenomenon of low female labor force participation in India. The first is occupational segregation. If we look at the distribution of the, sector-wise employment, we find that even today, nearly 75.7% of rural women are employed in agriculture. So we can clearly see through the 2 charts that on the urban side, yes, there has been a movement of women away from manufacturing and agriculture towards services over the decades. But for rural women, that has not happened. However, At the same time, this was accompanied by the fact that there was mechanization in agriculture. There was, a displacement of overall labor from agriculture over the decades. Thus, the job opportunities for rural women contract, and we are able to solve that, puzzle of why is it that the female labor force participation is falling. It's because rural women are not getting the opportunity to move out of agriculture into other professions in services and manufacturing sector. The second thing which I just talked about, the increasing mechanization and automation. While of course this has hit agriculture, it's also hitting other industries, handicrafts, handlooms, being replaced by power looms. Textile sector has been a biggest employer of women, and that's where you've seen that change happen. You're also now seeing a displacement of women in services sector with automation, mechanization coming in much higher rates than men. So this digital divide and the lack of STEM skills is likely to be one of the biggest factors resulting in displacement of women from work. The third is what I call the income effect. Essentially, if you are considered, because of social norms and because of the gender wage gap, the secondary income earner in your family, it is likely that you are the one who will withdraw from the labor force. It's also a status symbol. हमारे घर की औरतें काम नहीं करती, because it is considered that when a family is rich enough or have the household wealth, they do not need to send their women to work. And this is something that we have seen over the last few decades. As per capita incomes have increased, there's a withdrawal of women from the workforce because of this status issue. And this again impacts the rural sector much more than the urban sector. Then, of course, social norms, as Neetu ji, of course, went into great detail about the social norms. But essentially, there are studies over studies over studies. And we've also looked at the data on age-specific female labor force participation rates and found that essentially it is those age categories, like, 30 to 34, 25 to 29, where you are in your childbearing years, where you see the maximum reduction in female labor force participation rate over time, even over the decades. So there is an increasing trend towards women withdrawing more and more as they have kids. And this is borne out in the data. And as Neetu ji shared in her personal story, when she had a child, she didn't have access to care infrastructure or any kind of care services. Today, we have care services. We have some kind of creches. We have, at least in the urban areas, they are there. But what about rural areas? When we talk about Narega, for example, it's one of the biggest employers of women in rural areas today. And it is by law mandated that there should be a creche at every Narega construction facility. If today somebody goes and does a random survey, I would be very interested in understanding what percentage of Narega facilities actually have that creche. Right? So that is, I mean, I'm not blaming any government here. It's all governments, right? All governments, all organizations, all agencies are not prioritizing this issue because they are not understanding that it needs to be prioritized. Then, of course, we have the issue of gender gaps in education and training. Now, it's very interesting because in primary and secondary enrollment, we've actually achieved gender parity. We have almost a equal number of men and women, girls and boys, I would say in this case, who are enrolling into education. But the minute you take it to tertiary level or you take it to a skill training program, you start to see the gaps emerging. And why is that? Because you have few tertiary educational institutions in the country. Schools, primary schools are now within 5 kilometers of your home. 99% of households in India have access to a primary school within 5 kilometers of their home. 96% within 1 kilometer. But what about secondary schools? What about tertiary schools? And it's so unsafe, as Neetu ma'am said, it's so unsafe to actually cycle or walk to your school if you're going to get attacked on the way. And why is it that, girl students in India still have to fight for this right of just going to school? I mean, it's shocking that we are still here, but this is the explanation, because unless you do tertiary education or skill training, you will again be then stuck in agriculture or a low skilled, low paying profession, and will not be able to move up the value chain and access new job opportunities. So at Nikor Associates, we did, once the pandemic hit. So I just want to talk a little bit about the COVID impact as well, because Dr. Chakravarti talked about it at the beginning, where he was talking about CMIE data. And, we did consultations with around 60 organizations across 13 states at Nikor Associates. And, you can see the distribution in the map and also in the pie chart in front of you, what kind of organizations. NGOs and academic organizations, also a lot of SHGs and MSMEs. And, we basically found that there were 5 reasons for the disproportionate impact of COVID on women. First was, of course, the greater, job losses. The second was disproportionate mobility restrictions. Literally people telling me that earlier we never had to take permission for leaving the house, but now we do. Why? Because they think that COVID is going to affect us. Well, my response was, but hello, aren't less women dying of COVID than men? Like, you have a lower mortality rate amongst women than men of COVID-19. So why should the mobility restrictions be more on women? In fact, in a situation like this, men should be sitting at home and women should go out and work. It's a great opportunity to completely reverse the gender roles. And then, of course, you have the increase in unpaid work. I mean, of course, Meetu ma'am said that 3 times, that's a global number. In India, it's actually 10 times. So the NSSO 2019 data, which came out, has proven that women spend 6 hours a day on domestic work, men spend 30 minutes on average. And this doesn't vary by rural and urban areas, by the way. So you could be a rural woman, you could be an urban woman, you could be married, you could be unmarried, you could be looking after the elderly, you could be looking after children. We are actually doing a very extensive study to understand what are those reasons and factors that women are doing so much work at home. And then, of course, we have the digital gender divide, which has been the worst for women, because when it comes to a constrained situation where families don't have income sources and they can only buy one phone or one smartphone, guess who that phone goes to? It doesn't go to the girl child, it goes to the boy. And then finally, you have the shadow pandemic of domestic violence, which nobody talks about because nobody understands that domestic violence has a direct impact on female labor force participation. It's a two-way impact. If you are a victim of domestic violence or a survivor of domestic violence, your confidence is already broken. So it's hard for you to go back to work. If you are working, it's actually more likely that you will suffer domestic violence because there could be ego clashes in your house. So do you work? Do you not work? No. Either way, you can't protect yourself from the aggressor when they happen to be in your home. So, I just want to stop the presentation here and say that there is a lot of anger that I feel as a young woman today. I got married last week. I'm very lucky to have a very supportive partner, a very equal partner, but not everyone gets that chance. And I feel that young women in India today should be angrier, very angry that this country is not doing them the justice that they deserve. And that's why at Nikor Associates, we are doing this research, we are putting the data out there, because with data comes the truth. And nobody can now deny the truth. So with that, I'll stop and hand back over to Pankaj ji or Dr. Chakravarti.
Thank you so much. I think Mr. Pankaj will take on from here, but I couldn't stop myself from asking 2 questions to you. It's a very interesting presentation which you have done. First of all, congratulations for the marriage which has happened last week. Just 2 questions, Pankaj ji, before you chip in. I think you have raised various important points on this, and as I said in my starting remarks, I'm not an expert in this area. But 2 points which I want to do, if you can help us to understand. One, you said very valid point that as GDP is growing, the per capita income is growing, the women participation is coming out from the labor force, and which is very so. So can I conclude as a quantitative person that as India develops more, the gap will enhance further if there is not much of social uh, impact comes onto this factor and more than economic factors? So that's first question, if you can explain. And second one, I just wanted to ask you, since you said that wage, we all know that there's a disparity in the wage between male and female, and male get more um, wages than female. So you made a point that during the COVID, especially in this labor force, the females were, there was more unemployment in the female compared to male. But if you look from a cost factors, the male should have been removed because they are more costlier than female, and especially in the textile and other things where the female can do better job than male. So why this disparity was there?
So I think Dr. Chakravarti, I take the second one first. What happened during COVID? The sectors which were hit the hardest during COVID were the ones which employed women disproportionately. So leave aside agriculture. Agriculture was not that badly hit till April 21 in the second wave. In the second wave, 80% of job losses which happened were actually rural women. 7 million job losses the 5.6 yeah 6 million was all rural women who lost jobs in that 1 month. Now, but coming back to the first wave, in the first wave, what happened was that it was a macro impact, right? Because it was a whole national lockdown. It was not as though it was a, like one state or the other. Now, what happened was March 20 to April 20, around 113 million jobs were lost. Of this, 15.4 million were women. The rest were almost 100 million men. So absolute numbers, of course, men lost jobs, but proportionally, that 15.4 million women was 30% of the female labor force. But men was less than that. It was only 25%. So the basic point we are making is that even in this situation where literally 100 million men lost jobs, still the proportion of job losses amongst women was higher. Because it's about who is a cost center versus who is a revenue center. And the job roles that women do are more expendable across industries. Of course, in the organized sector and in the office sector, for example, corporate sector that we see, HR and admin and all these roles are mostly filled by women. And that is how companies show their diversity ratios as well, because they will say, oh, we have 30% women. But by the way, what are those women doing? They are all sitting and doing HR work. They are all cost centers. So who is the first person to be axed? They are all the ones who are doing cost center work. But the ones who are doing revenue generation like sales or IT or consulting, etc., you hardly see any women, especially in the leadership levels. So the point is that where are the women? It's important to map where they are, and that's when we can actually unpack the story of why is it that they were hit the hardest. They were hit the hardest because sectors like hospitality, textile, retail, all of these which employ large proportions of women just were wiped out. And the worst part is, if we look at the data as well, and also if we look at our own experience, right, talking to people and everything, many of these sectors have still not bounced back. Right? Textiles and hospitality is doing well in sports. Like you have Durga Puja in Calcutta. I am sure Pankaj ji can also say, and I can also say, literally we had hotels and restaurants running out of food, right? But once the puja has stopped, now people have stopped going, and again the restaurants are empty, and we are all like, "Acha, ab to Calcutta mein surge ho raha hai, we have to sit at home again." Right? So the way the COVID economy is functioning, it's a spike and like it's become like that. There's spike and then trough and spike and then trough. Whereas in the normal scheme of things, it was like a pretty much growing spurt. Now, coming back to your first question, right? That, okay, if per capita income keeps on increasing, will we actually see a trend where women keep on withdrawing? It'll depend on two factors. The first is the education and skill training efforts. if women are educated, like we are seeing this in the data, the only category of women where female labor force participation is increasing are tertiary graduates and above. Over the decades, this category of women, professional women, corporate sector, this is the only category which has done well and has increased. Whereas the women who have lower levels of education, secondary or below, have fallen, and then the non-literate women has increased as well. So the non-literate women have increased because those are agricultural wage labor or casual workers, etc., who have to work to survive. So that category will definitely keep coming down if per capita keeps increasing. So unless you increase the average education level and skill training level of women, definitely they will have a disincentive to work. So you have to make efforts to, bridge gender parity when it comes to tertiary education and skill training. Because new jobs that are coming in the STEM sector, etc., if a woman does not even have the permission to own a mobile phone, how is she going to run a digital online business, which is probably going to be the norm in the next 10 years?
Thank you so much. I think that was really nice. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Meetu and Mitali, for your wonderful perspective. So before just put in some questions from myself and from the audience, I would request Meetu to share the second poll question.
Yes, thank you. Team, if you could put in the second poll question. Till the time the question is coming up, I would, yes, there it is. How much percentage of women are unemployed in urban areas? I think Mitali did cover this. Yes, so it's 21.9%, and the source is Center for Monitoring Indian Economy 2020. For rural areas, it's 15.3%. Yes, so we can have the screen removed. Thank you for polling in, and please share your questions in the chat box, and over to you, Pankaj.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a wonderful presentation. All the points have been covered. We understand everything well. Mitali, your anger is understood, and I mean, this is historical and cultural in the human mind. So cultural takes 100 years to change. Maybe in our case, it will take 200 years. But now, my question to both of you is, I mean, what can we do? Who are our role model? What is the way forward? So I would just like to throw two small questions. Is it really a job problem or a wage problem? I mean, you try to say that it's a mix of both. It's a cultural issue, but what is it really? The global picture shows that it's really a wage problem. Very, very, very rarely a woman rises at the board level in spite of hard work, in spite of equal opportunities. That is a global picture. But what is it for India? This is one. And the second is, if we have to look forward to some countries which have done stellar work in this area, which could be those regions or those countries. Definitely it will not be Afghanistan. We can rule out that. But which would be those countries? It could be Scandinavia, or it could be Rwanda, or some other countries in Africa or in Latin America? Which would be those places where, and what are those specific policies which will make a difference? So that's all to both of you, Mitu and Mithali.
Okay, so I think Mithali will be better to answer this in a more technical and more data centered way. But I think when we are talking about wage problem or employment problem, I think it's both. Because it was very apparent from what Mithali shared that if women are, paid lower than men, so when it comes to choice to choose in the house who leaves the job to take care of children or household, then it's definitely going to be women, because they get paid less and maybe their growth prospects are not going to be as high and as fast as it would be for men. So I think it is both, and gender pay gap is a huge concern all over the world, not only, and in some of the top industries. I mean, if you look at Hollywood, if you look at some of the top places where women are, equally deserving, there is a huge pay gap between men and women. So that my perspective is from the social point of view. I think Mithali is a better person to be able to address this.
Thank you, Peter. And no, I don't think that it's about better or worse. It's about your perspective. I think you're absolutely right that it's definitely both wage and job problem. But I think Pankaj, I know you are a businessman, so of course you will look at it as wage problem, job problem. How do I do this? But I think it's an attitude problem. To be very honest, I would like to urge one thing, Pankaj, and I think you should take a pledge here today to document every day how much work you do at home. Just don't increase it or decrease it. Just write it down, and then write down in a diary how much your wife is doing or your daughter or daughter-in-law are doing. Just write it. And once you do the accounting the way we do in business, we do accounting, you will understand yourself that this equation is not adding up. So it's an attitude problem. Now I am in a house where I am not cooking. My partner might be cooking tonight because I have this webinar today. Tomorrow he might have something and I may take up cooking. There are no gender roles in our house, which is why I agreed to marry him. I would have not agreed otherwise. But not all girls have the agency that I do to agree or disagree. So again, it's an attitude problem. Unless we change our mindsets and our attitude, that, and I love the post that Samantha Prabhu, this actress, she just got divorced and she has put it up on Instagram that please invest in your daughter's education and not spend on her wedding. I mean, it'll be sad for the wedding industry, and I am also looking forward to, I just wore a very nice lehenga, so I can tell you that I also loved dressing up and everything. But it's not about that. I paid for my own lehenga with the money that I have earned. I did not allow my father to pay for it. So, these are the things like this self-belief that you are an equal contributor to your family's finances. You are an equal contributor to the housework on the other side. I feel that 30-40% of the problem can be solved just with this attitude change. Aside from that, I do feel that there are some institutional changes and policy changes that are needed. For example, the maternity leave policy that we have in India right now. It places the onus of 6 months of maternity leave on the private firm, which is employing women. This is actually a disincentive for the private firm, which is employing the women, because how can they pay 6 months of maternity leave, especially for MSME sector? Like for large corporates, it's still affordable, but for MSME sector, it's a very big cost. And this disincentivizes a lot of MSMEs from hiring women in full-time roles where they have that statutory compliance. They may be hired as consultants or they may be hired as informal workers. So we need to create different solutions the way, as Pankaj was mentioning, Netherlands and other Scandinavian countries, the UK, they all have actually got matching fund systems where, the state pays a certain amount for parental leave and companies also do a contribution, kind of like an EPF system. And of course, we need to move away from maternity leave. I mean, we are in 2021. Where are the fathers? I mean, they were there when they were creating the child. So why are they not there to take care of the child? I mean, that kind of thinking has to just change. Again, attitude problem. So, we have to have some kind of policy mechanisms, but mostly it has to be about awareness. The last thing that I will say is, in order to boost the employment of women in the government sector, government can definitely take steps like introducing quotas for hiring women in IAS, IPS, etc. Also in PWDs, in other kind of vacancies that governments have. They can definitely have a system where women are hired. At least 30% women are there at every level. In fact, I think Mr. Tarun Gogoi, when he was contesting for the chief ministership of Assam, had actually proposed this, that if he was brought to power, he would actually bring in, a norm, not a rule or a law, but a norm to hire 30% women. So it's almost like a guidance, that try to do it. Don't make it a law, but say, yes, try to bring in at least 30% women in your department. Try to look for it. So, have that awareness that diversity is important, that women being part of the workforce is important. Also, preferential procurement. I mean, the government has so many large contracts that it gives out through the GEM portal, through all of these, procurement mechanisms that they have. And at this point, women are only entitled to 3.5% preferential procurement. And MSMEs are overall entitled to 25% preferential procurement. I think the shares of both these need to be increased. MSMEs should be at least 40-50%, and women-owned MSMEs should be 50% of that, so that they get a boost. And women entrepreneurship requires a big boost in this country. We need more funds, we need more investors in women entrepreneurs, women startups, VCs, but also the micro entrepreneurs in the rural areas. SFGs are today amongst the most vibrant communities of working women in rural India. And we really need to, boost them. We need to buy from them. So when it says vocal for local, that's really, for me, vocal for local means being vocal for the, self-help groups, small micro entrepreneurs in and around us who are working so hard, and the women who are working so hard. So I think this is a couple of suggestions which I have immediately.
Yeah, so we have two questions coming in. So we just take it quickly because for the sake of paucity of time, I think they're very relevant. You can see it, Mitali. Yeah, so I think one is from this Aditya Shreya. I think it's a very, this is a very rural-centric issue, but it is a very important issue, as you said rightly, attitudes. So in the rural area, there is this concept of women made the sarpanch of the town, but actually who is calling the shot? The husband of that woman. So that is a very grassroots level issue, which is again an attitude and the cultural issue, which takes a long time to change. I don't think there are any easy solutions here. There is another very relevant question, that how specific, this is from Deep Mehta. Thank you, Deep, for asking this question. How specific the women-specific bank accounts and other business plans have really impacted the social mindset and the economic security of women. It would be pertinent to go back to the Bangladesh example, which Professor Mathur has touched upon. It's a stellar case where you can directly co-link the economic empowerment of women with the social indicators. You can see infant mortality, the hygiene, the education standard. I'm sure that that would not have happened if the same amount of earning would have come into the household through men. But that is only happening because that same amount of earning is coming through women. The social impact is much more. The man would have preferred to spend on other things, but not so much on health, hygiene, sanitation, and stuff like that. So in the Indian context, the question is that the schemes from the government, like bank accounts and business plans and women entrepreneur enabled scheme and special incentives, what you're just talking about, do they really help?
Oh, so would you like me to just quickly?
Yeah, maybe you can take, or Meetu can add, anyone or anybody has a perspective on this. I think Deep, you can come live if you wish and ask this question, if you wish.
Yes, Deep, Aditya, both of you should come live.
Yeah. Let me just unmute them. Also, Aditya.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello, am I audible? Hello. Hello.
Yes, you are audible. You are audible. You have to unmute yourself, Deep.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought Aditya was going first. Do I repeat my question?
Yeah,
specifically?
Do you want to just get into it a little?
Yes, so specifically, there's been a lot of discussion about women businesses and a lot of interventions by governments, schemes specific to MSMEs run by women, specific to self-help groups, and empowering women by providing them direct benefit transfers, by having programs specifically for girls, specifically for householders, and specifically in rural areas as well as in urban areas, but largely in rural areas for political or social reasons. To what extent, since the data clearly shows that women are not as employed in the workforce as they were, the trends are not very favorable to the gender gap, to bridging the gender gap. To what extent can we have understood these factors these interventions to have worked out? Is it that the impact has been positive, but circumstances have been so negative that the net effect has been negative, or is it that they are largely useless and haven't really worked out?
No, they are not useless. So I would say that they're not sufficient. What has happened so far, I mean, if we look at a lot of the interventions that are done in the gender space, especially from the government side, they're not for economic empowerment. They're like providing either income support or they're on the health, education, nutrition side and or on the violence side. There's a very interesting paper that Oxfam has put out, and actually we are just full disclosure, Deep is with Nikkor Associates. So there's a paper that we put out recently, and Oxfam did like a version of it as well, and we're tying up with Oxfam on it. So in that paper, they've actually analyzed the public investment required for meeting the goals of a violence policy, like a policy to deal with domestic violence. And actually, the amount of money allocated is just a trickle of what is needed as per the government's own announcements. So where is the rest of the funding going to come from, right? So, and honestly, I am not a believer of big government. I don't think that, we necessarily need government to come in on, women's economic empowerment. I think it's also a big push that should be made by the private sector and by all of us. Because if the private sector is benefiting from a woman employee, then why should she not be paid the same as a male employee? Right? It makes no sense. It's just that they're getting away with it because of the way capitalism just is. So I don't think that it's about the ineffectiveness. I think it's just about the fact that this is a difficult space for the government to come and legislate into. And difficult space for the government to come and make policy for, but definitely there are one or two areas, as I just outlined, where policy can come in, and it has not yet.
I do have a follow-up question, if that's all right.
I don't know if Pankajji, do we have time?
Yeah, maybe a very quick one. We don't have time to elaborate, but maybe we can just hear it
Sure.
out and.
Sure, I'll make it very brief. So specifically, to what extent have social businesses been able to contribute to women empowerment? Since, of course, governments have a lot of political entanglements, and I was hoping to have asked Professor Mathur this question: to what extent have social businesses like Grameen Bank been responsible for the development in Bangladesh? So yeah, I wouldn't elaborate on it.
Yeah, but Deep, do mail Professor Mathur. So he's done a knowledge cafe with us as well. And we were just chatting as this call was going on separately as well. So just mail him. He will respond.
Yeah, but I just want to add here that I have some knowledge about Bangladesh. So the microfinance movement in Bangladesh, which was enabled by Muhammad Yunus, that has been a big enabler there for the microfinancing of the earnings, which the wage was coming back to the rural areas by the women. So that was a big enabler for distribution of that wealth and some kind of job creation in the rural areas, be it distribution of vegetables, be it some small services to the households. So that has got some effect. But the primary effect has come from the women employed in the large factories. That's all. But I think you can mail the question and we can get a bigger picture from Professor Mathur. I think Neetu, we can just deliver the vote of thanks and we are good to close this wonderful session.
Okay, Dr. Chakrabarti is there?
No, I think he had to leave. He was in a rush, so he had to leave. Yeah.
Okay.
So it comes from you.
Okay. Right. So I think it was a really interesting discussion. I can really, Mithali, relate to your passionate outbursts on these things, and it reminded me of the younger days and how, you would, I think we all start out because I would agree with this, that till the time you are in the primary school or middle school, things are, there's not much of a gap between, at least in the urban, and as you start going towards tertiary education and the professional realm, there is so much of the societal, the pressures or conditioning, I would say. I won't even say pressure, but there is this conditioning that, just kind of asks us to make certain decisions, and we are more comfortable, following that role that we have been conditioned to. And of course, it was a pleasure listening to you and all the data and your perspective on the economics of this whole gender gap in employment. Thank you so much, everyone who joined in today. Thank you to Professor Mathur as well to starting this discussion, and keep on following Tribe. We keep on hosting very interesting conversations, and looking forward to seeing all of you once again. Good night.
And just to sum up, next one is going to be a great event in November. It's something very interesting coming up. So all the people here, please stay tuned to more updates. Have a good night, all of us. I think we are good to leave. Thank you.
Bye.